How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I've got a very special guest for you all. I last spoke to this guy back in episode 115, which you all really enjoyed. Today, I'm joined by a physical preparation coach, co-owner of IFAST, the one and only Mike Robertson. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me, and excited to be back on.
Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Like I say, really enjoyed the first time that we spoke. I know it was a lot of episodes away from there, but
Yep.
how are you? What's been happening in your world recently?
Oh man, everything's good here. Gym is going well. Online biz going well. Kids are getting bigger. It's almost Christmas time here in the States, so they're obviously excited for that. But yeah, if it was just maybe a little bit more sun outside and a little bit more warmth, I'd be great. But yeah, all in all, it's hard to complain, man.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's 6:30 here, and I think it got dark at about 4:30 in Leeds today. So yeah, I can completely understand that. And are you all set for Christmas? Got plans for the new year?
Oh man, I would love to say I am. I should actually just ask my wife because she would know better than I would. She takes care of a lot of that stuff. But yeah, man, we're ready. We're excited. We're between my wife and I, we're keeping it pretty small, but yeah, just looking forward to some extra time off, a little extra time with family, and yeah, just getting to hang out with the kids a little bit more. Should be good.
Yeah, nice. And with the obviously with the time of year and heading into the new year, how is coaching and programming? How's all that going and working?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of times people assume that if you're in the fitness business that you're immediately busier when the new year hits.
Mm.
And at least the type of business that I run at IFAST, we don't really see that. A lot of times it's like when somebody's ready, they're ready. And sometimes that's July, sometimes it's September, sometimes it's December. But we don't really get a lot of that New Year's rush or New Year's resolution type crowd like a big box gym would. I run an annual program that I start at the start of the year for generally it's other trainers and coaches that just want to have somebody write a program for them and help them out with their nutrition and recovery. So I do that on the online side. But as far as the offline business goes, I don't see a huge uptick in January just because I don't think that's the kind of customer or client that we really cater to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, and I know, it might be a little bit of a tangent, but especially from, things are kind of, back to normal now after COVID. And
Yes.
this is kind of especially in the UK, the first Christmas or time of year where, everything is back to normal. But in
Yep.
terms of the gym that I'm at, we're still getting consultations and inquiries at this time of year, which, would have been quiet as opposed to let's
Yep.
just wait in December and then just go in January. Is that the same sort of thing that where you are from what you've experienced since COVID?
Yeah, I think there is that element of it. And the other thing is too is we're always pushing people and trying to educate people like if you're ready now, why would you wait 4 more weeks?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, granted, it's not the best time of year if your goal is weight loss or fat loss, just because, there's parties and events and everybody and their brother is bringing like baked goods into your gym or your workspace. But at the same time, it's like, why wait? Why wait another 4 weeks? If you're ready now, like, let's get started now. Let's start building some of those habits and those routines. So when the new year does get here, hey, now you've already got a little bit of a base or a foundation. We can really lock in and go forward from there. So we're always trying to educate our people. Like, if you're ready, don't wait for some specific day. Like, let's just get going now and see what kind of changes we can make.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that there's that phrase of there is no right time, so you may as well
Yes.
you may as well give it. And I've had a couple of conversations with clients and coaches, to be fair, at this time of year where it's a case of if you can make progress or even maintain at this time of year, that's still really good. So when things do quieten down, it's going to be a lot easier to see a little bit more progress or change
Yes.
your goals or whatever it may be. Um, that goes quite nicely into some of the topics that I had in mind.
Yeah.
And one thing that you said there, especially from the content and the information that you put out there is, wanting to educate people, not just, coaches, but also clients as well. And It's the thought process of, there's going to be this special exercise. If I do this one exercise, I'm never going to get injured, or I need to do this. And I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on how what your definition is of bulletproof training. How do we make somebody, be able to be robust for training? And just, I kind of wanted to see your thoughts on that, or what your definition is.
Yeah, and I love this topic. I love talking about it. I think if you've been in this game long enough, there is no one activity or exercise that makes you bulletproof. I wish there was, because we'd all be doing it and nobody would be having an ACL tear, an Achilles strain, or rotator cuff tendinopathy. Like, if we knew what those exercises were exactly, we'd never have issues. But I think when we start talking about activities as a whole, we're kind of focusing on the wrong thing. And so what I try and help people understand is, look, there is no one exercise or activity. Yes, I feel like some are better than others, but so much of this idea of bulletproofing somebody comes down to a much more holistic approach to movement, right? And there's a lot of factors that come into it. It's just how much variability do you have in your system, right? And I know that's probably not the term that people are using as much now, but movement variability, and just that ability to move in and out of different positions, to load one side and unload the opposite side. It's not sexy, it's not cool, but a lot of the people that we see that get injured tend to get stuck in very specific postures or patterns. So it's maintaining that element of movement variability. It's making sure they have a certain level of force production to meet the needs and the demands of their sport. This is a really hot topic, the whole how strong is strong enough. Because you see, frail little Johnny who's never stepped in a weight room. Well, he's at risk for getting injured because he's literally so weak. He can't meet the demands of his sport. But on the other side of that, you've got the guy that's pushed heavy weights for 10 years, and now he moves and trains more like a power lifter than he does an athlete. Well, that guy is not seeing the same benefits in year 10 that he did in year 3 or 4. So trying to optimize force production, I think, is important. Conditioning is a big piece of this, and something I think we're starting to get better and better at is trying to figure out, okay, what are the needs and the demands of this sport from a physiology perspective? Because somebody that plays baseball doesn't have anywhere near the same energy production demands as somebody that is playing soccer in the World Cup, right? That's just top of mind right now, because, these guys are playing 60, 90, some of them play 120 minutes at a clip. So I think the conditioning element of it is huge. And then when we start talking about all of this, it's coming back to making better exercise choices. And trying to figure out, okay, hey, if we want to squat, that's great. Squatting is a fantastic activity for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. But what squat variation is going to work best for the client or athlete that's standing in front of you, right? So picking the right exercises based on the client, and then picking exercises that are going to bulletproof, in air quotes, those areas that are most likely to get injured. And that's where you have to kind of reverse engineer the sport. So again, coming back to this idea of soccer, hey man, hamstrings are a really big deal. So what are some activities we can work in there, whether it's just some high velocity sprinting to try and bulletproof those hamstrings, into more focused like hamstring progressions and activities. So you can look at that. If you're looking at basketball, we know ankles and knees tend to get beat up. So maybe some isolative quad or gastroc soleus type work needs to be put in there. So I know that's a really kind of diluted and broad answer, but I think a lot of times people want to get focused on this one activity to bulletproof whatever. Like, that sounds great, and there's a time and a place for it, but you have to look at the big picture first to determine how that one activity is going to fit into the big picture program.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was a really good answer. And in terms of like what you mentioned there, people want to, or coaches want to dive into just one area rather than thinking about what are the big rocks we need to focus on. Is that sometimes or the main area where you think sometimes coaches potentially go wrong, or maybe they try and want to bulletproof everything and make them as though they're wearing a suit of armor and be like, right, I'm just going to cover everything, whereas actually they'll end up covering nothing, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah. So I think what ends up happening is your program just gets so dilute, you don't really get a whole lot done. Uh, and I'll see this. It's funny, like the college age kids that send me, just like the random workouts that they get that are just like auto generated. And there's like 20 exercises in the workout. And you're like, look, nobody really does this because it would take like 2.5 hours to get through. So I think that's the big thing. If you're trying to do everything, the program becomes so dilute. I don't know if you ever get any true training adaptations that you're looking for. Uh, on the flip side of that, you do have the people where it's just like, for whatever reason, they're really strongly biased towards just one thing, right? So it's like, oh man, got to have strong quads or got to have strong hamstrings. And again, time and a place for it, but understanding where those activities fit into the bigger picture is what we have to better understand as coaches. And I think that's where we have to take a step back, try and get that 30,000-foot view first and try and figure out, okay, what's the big picture? And then we can hone in on the specific details or exercises from there.
Yeah. In terms of that, when you're trying to have a look at the bigger picture, because trying to look at certain exercises, if coaches have had, if they do the Olympic lifts and they want to get someone to develop more power, they might gravitate more towards the Olympic lift. Somebody who's done a little bit more powerlifting might gravitate towards that. Do you think that when it comes to, because you mentioned at the start about that exercise variability, because just touching on power, there's a lot of different things that you can use for power, not necessarily the lifts all the time. Do you think sometimes coaches learning from other, I don't know whether fields is the right term, but other methods, and trying to incorporate them in their own training can allow them to add that variety in and see that bigger picture rather than just focusing on one area?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something we're constantly getting better at. I mean, I think about when I came out, right, and I got into this area, there were basically three schools, right? There was like physical preparation programs, but it was like physical preparation, but biased by Olympic lifting or biased by powerlifting or biased by bodybuilding. And so you could almost see like the head strength coach's influence and their background in their programs. Now, as we've gotten better at this, as we've diversified, obviously there's so much more information out there now. It's so much more readily available. You're seeing less of this, but I think you're always going to be limited initially by your own experiences and your own biases. So if I'm an Olympic lifter that coaches athletes, well, of course, I want all of them to Olympic lift because I know it's made me faster or more explosive or stronger. And that's fine early on. I think your goal over time is to constantly expose yourself to new trains of thought, right? So an Olympic lift might work great for certain athletes. It may not work as great for whatever reason for other athletes. So it's knowing, hey, Olympic lifting is a great tool to have in my toolbox. Now, which athletes is it going to serve the best? And with other athletes, would they be better served maybe not doing Olympic lifting, but throwing medicine balls, right? Or doing more plyometrics, right? Because we can achieve a lot of the same kind of results or end goals using those different mediums. So it comes down to, okay, hey, we're all going to have our biases. We're all going to have the things that we enjoy doing ourselves as athletes, and that's fine. But over time, working to widen our own lens, widen our own scope. So we're not just like blindly following, well, I'm an Olympic lifter, so everybody's going to Olympic lift. Yeah. It's like, hey, this is a great tool for these people, but I've got all these other tools in my toolbox as well. So now it just comes down to deploying the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, definitely, and with that, because there's a trend at the minute where and I know it especially in a lot of gyms sort of around Leeds in terms of group training for athletes. So there might be a variety of more so team athletes within that group, and there's certain things that as athletes people will they all need a certain level of strength. They all need a certain level of speed and all those sorts of things. In terms of adding that in, do you think sometimes it's a case of, is that always going to benefit the athlete, that group side of things, because it's like a generalist rather than specific? Is there ever a need, or is there going to be a breaking point when you need to get more specific for that sport?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is like the blessing and curse of group exercise in that model, right? So if you've got really more than like 4 kids, or if you're getting like 6, 8, 10, or like a team and everybody's coming in and like a large group, your ability to individualize the program gets smaller.
Yeah.
Now, it's not impossible. And I think we've shown at IFAST that we can do that in large groups and small groups. But I think early on, that generalist approach is going to work great. And this is something like I'm even doing that now. Like, you know, the last couple of years of my career, I've been very focused on high level athletes, and that's still a focus. But as my kids get older, now I find myself getting back into that youth model, right? So I've got my daughter and some of her friends coming into the gym a couple nights a week, and it's very general, right? We play games, which they think it's games. I think it's accelerations, decelerations, change of direction, perception, body awareness. So, but I digress. Like we're playing games. We're doing focus like speed and power activities. We're sprinting, cutting, jumping. We're teaching them the fundamentals of a push-up, a lunge, a squat. So I think all those things have a place early on, right? Building that really broad movement library. But then the longer somebody is around sport, the longer they are playing their given sport, the higher level they ascend or aspire to ascend to, then you have to get progressively more specific and more individualized. But I honestly think you could probably get somebody to 15, 16 years old just doing general stuff and body weight type activities, and then start to work in more of that individualized training. I think we're in such a rush these days, and I don't know how it is there, but I mean, we've got kids 13, 14 years old here that are already like barbell back squatting, heavy bench pressing in like this large group environment in a high school weight room. It's insane. And I think so many of these kids could benefit from just mastering their own body weight first, right? Internal loading, broad just movement skill development, movement awareness. I think that's a way better place to start because there is a time and a place, right? If somebody's going to play, you know, depending on the school you're at, maybe if they're going to play varsity sports, because some of these schools here are huge, 5,000, 6,000 kids. If you're going to play varsity sports, you probably need a little bit more individualized program. If you're going to go play in college at the professional level, you need to be individualized. But early on, I think we could benefit from a lot more generalized programming that just touches all those bases.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I had so working in team sports and then more focusing in just on the gym. I've still got a really good friend that works for professional sports teams around Leeds, and he's for the sort of like scholarship up to the academy. Yep. And because they're growing naturally themselves, naturally getting stronger, now the kids that he's had from the scholarship up into the academy, their squats and their deadlifts and all the movements are really good because for a lot of it, they were just doing in the scholarship, they were just doing goblet squats. They were just doing learning how to do a proper push-up, a body weight chin-up. You know, as they're developing, that can still go a long way in terms of, you know, because realistically, how strong do you need to be at 13, 14? You know, it's only when you get in academy and then looking for maybe first team and maybe going professional or anything that you're going to look at that. And just from what you were saying there, kind of two follow-up questions, probably from the more of the athletes and the clients' point of view. That's not to say that the group side of things is negative at all. I think, you know, it's been shown that there's that competitive side of things and people enjoy the side of that. For that middle ground of, you know, kids going up into playing adult sport and the level below sort of like elite or a little bit more serious, can they still get sort of repeatable success and still keep, you know, in that group environment, in that generalist side of things that's going to improve their performance rather than potentially pushing, you know, individualization and then injuring themselves or you know, not helping their performance?
Yeah. You know, I don't worry too much about them getting injured in that type of environment. What I worry most about is just them getting bored. So case in point, a lot of the kids that I'm working with in this group now, they're like between 10, 11, 12 years old, right? So prepubescent, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, still developing. A lot of them are starting to hit some growth spurts. So they're kind of gangly and, you know, not coordinated. So like body weight is great for them. But then one of the gals or one of the other parents that I knew sent their daughter, who's like a sophomore, junior in high school. So she's got a little bit of weightlifting experience. So that's where, if you have this well thought out progression of activities, you can very seamlessly upgrade or downgrade an activity based on where that person is at. So case in point, all these young people, they look like a collection of body parts when they try and squat, right? Even just like a body weight squat, give them, a little ramp so they can sit down, like a 5 or 10 pound plate to keep their weight back. Just them trying to slowly squat down and own the position is work. It's really hard for them, right? So I'm giving them that activity, but then this other girl who has some weightlifting experience, I've got her, as you alluded to, she's goblet squatting, right? Really clean form. We've got enough weight so it's challenging by the time she hits 8 to 10 reps. I don't feel pressed for her to get a barbell on her back or, in a front squat type position, because she can get a lot out of that activity. What I'd rather do is, continue to push her on that activity. If she came to me for months or years, hey man, how heavy can we get you on a goblet squat? Because we know if you do that activity, it's very hard to get into a bad position, right? So, hey, let's get to a point where now the limiting factor isn't your legs, it's not your core, it's your ability to hold that goblet position. Okay, well, now you've kind of mastered this activity. Let's move on to maybe a 2 kettlebell front squat now, right? Where it's a little bit easier to distribute the load. Now we can increase the challenge on your core, on your legs. So this is the way you basically scale any activity with an individual client. It's just being able to do it in that larger group setting. And I think that's one of the things that I've always prided myself on. And I remember, 5, 6, 7 years ago when we were working with the Indy 11, this was a big piece of it, because I've got 22 to 24 dudes walking in every session. There's a level of individualization, but I write the program based on the 80% that can do these 6 activities. And the other 10% that are just crushing that, they get an upgrade. The other 10% that don't move particularly well, or maybe they're new, or I don't have as much time coaching them, they get a little bit of a downgrade or a regression. And now everybody's doing the activity that they should be for the most part. It works really well.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's a good example of having a system that works, that he's going to get the results out of it. Do you think, touching on the bulletproofing side of things that we said at the start, do you think that's where either programs don't get the success, or maybe coaches don't get the results that they want because they don't have those systems and those? In my head, that was the strength standard, the strength standards of, if we can hit this, then we know that if we progress to the next thing, then we're not going to hurt. Do you think that's sometimes where coaches don't have those systems in place, or struggle with that?
Yeah, either they don't have like a set of standards in place, for sure, whether that's strength standards, whether that's movement standards. You got to have something that you're coaching to, right? And one of our old interns / employees, he's now with the Indiana Pacers, his name's Eric Huddleston, awesome dude. Eric used to talk about, I'm always trying to have my clients or athletes improve their movement by 1 letter grade per session. And I thought that was such a brilliant way to think about it, right? It's like, you don't expect somebody that's an F in their first session to be an A by the end, right? Like we think we're good coaches, but we're probably not that good. So if somebody's an F, all right, well, look, that's where you're at. Can we get you to a D? Or if you're a C, can we get you to a B? So I'm always thinking about that. But I think when we start talking about, again, like the exercise selection, you get in trouble when you're too far on either end of the spectrum, right? You got the people that are just super generalist, where it's like, oh, if you just squat and press and lunge and row, like if you just do those activities, you're going to be fine. And then you have the other people that pay no attention to those. They just do like specific activities to the sport, right? Like there's this blend. There should be a marrying of it. And I think that's one of the things that I've tried to evolve myself over the last couple of years. Is I used to be probably too generalist and like, oh, let the sport take care of it. But hey, man, in basketball, quads are important. Quads being able to absorb force, distribute force, being able to contract and relax quickly. That's important. solely a strength is important. So trying to find that blend of general plus specific exercises to help kind of just set the stage for your athlete to be healthy. And this is something you hear just incessantly argued on the internet, but the idea of injury prevention versus injury reduction, that whole like debate and the vernacular that goes on there. Like, look, man, at the end of the day, we're all trying to keep our athletes healthier. We want to keep them on the field quarter pitch. And I think the best way to do that is to have this blend of general and specific activities that when you pair those with the actual sport that they go out and play, and practicing for that gives them the best chance to stay healthy going forward. I think that's our end goal.
Yeah, definitely. And a couple of times you mentioned about your own experiences, and I talk a lot about the life cycle of a coach. I know when I first started programming, I'd put 100 exercises in there to be like they're all really important. Yep. Same as coaching cues, I'd say as much as I can. Whereas it's that standing joke of the more you coach, the less exercises you use, and the less you probably say.
Yeah.
One question that, especially from sort of like the younger coaches that I've spoken to as well, and you've said there in terms of in your head, right, bodyweight squat, goblet squat, 2 kettlebell squat, you have that progression in your head. Whereas a lot of younger coaches can sit and think, well, how do I determine my strength standards? What are my movement standards, and what has influenced your standards, your movement quality over time? And is that always kind of organic and fluid to change, or is it quite set in stone? How did you go about that?
Well, first off, I don't think anything I do is set in stone at this point. And it's funny because 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, everything's set in stone. I know exactly what I'm doing. And the longer you do this, the more you realize, no, like I'm pretty open-minded, and, I'm just always trying to tweak and refine. But I think the first thing that young coaches need to do is they need to sit down and very, very clearly map out what I would describe as their movement models. Okay. So you and I could say squat, and I have a very clear thought process or visualization of what I want a squat to look like. But my squat, maybe as an Olympic lifter, let's say, and if you're a power lifter, your interpretation of a squat, maybe in gear, right? If we really want to make this like opposite ends of the spectrum, could be totally different. And that's fine, but that's where we have to have these discussions of, hey, if you're a young coach, what does a perfect squat look like to you? What, like what joints are moving? What does the body position look like? Same thing. Once you've got that figured out, okay, what does a squat look like? What does a hinge or a deadlift look like? What is a perfect push-up, split squat? And it sounds mundane and basic, but when you sit down and you hash it out, a lot of times people haven't thought through this. They haven't fleshed it out. So just like you would have a strength standard of, oh, if somebody can front squat 1.5 times body weight, they're probably good enough on force production, right? So just like you have strength standards, you need movement standards, you need movement models. And so I think that's where we need to start. And then it comes down to, okay, if somebody can do that, what activities are more challenging? And you start to rationalize, okay, well, if somebody has a perfect split squat, well, maybe I want them to lunge next because I want them to be able to decelerate their body momentum and then be able to hit those same positions and push out of it. If somebody can't do that for whatever reason, okay, well, if they can't hit that model, why can't they do it? And how can you regress them? So this is where you really start to take this idea of your movement model builds everything forwards and backwards for you. But if you don't have a clear idea as to what your movement model is, now it's like, well, how can you create progressions and regressions if you don't know what that base activity should look like?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was a really good explanation, because I think there's sometimes coaches trying to get into getting clients and working with athletes kind of want to give them everything at once, or want to so intent on setting themselves apart or making a name for themselves, whereas actually sometimes the slower approach, having those systems in place, it's only going to have you're only going to provide a better service to the client and athlete, as opposed to, yeah, come and work with me. I'll be able to tell you what to do. Whereas having that system in your head, you can be like, right, this is the plan for the next 3 to 6 months. This is how we're going to get you from, a pretty good athlete to, we're going to be killing it. In terms of those exercises, and you touched on this a little bit as well, in terms of specific exercises for the sport, and because now with social media, the internet, there's loads of exercises. You could type in and special exercises for basketball, and there would be lots and lots of things that would come up from there. How do you kind of filter out what works, what doesn't work, and looking at exercises if it is so far removed from what everyone else is doing? Do you really give it a go, or do you maybe think, I'm just gonna leave it there? How do you kind of manage those challenges?
Yeah, this is really hard. And I always say, I really am thankful I grew up and became a coach when I did. I think it's so much harder now. So if you're a young coach listening to this, I feel for you. There's so much information. There's so much overwhelm, right? Because like you said, if I type basketball specific exercises and went to Instagram, probably millions of videos and reels and different people with different thought processes, right? So I think the big thing to try and help you understand this is, first and foremost, if you're going to do something, try it on yourself first, right? Never try something new on a client, on an athlete. It's a recipe for disaster. Try it on yourself. Put it through your filter of, does this make logical sense, right? I'm very big on vetting the people that are espousing this information, right? And that's not to say that social media is a great indicator either, because there are people with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers that know absolutely nothing, as far as real world practical information, but for whatever reason, they've hit it big on social. So I'm very big on, okay, who is this person? What is their background? What's their education? Who have they worked with? What kind of demonstrable results have they seen? Because I'll give you kind of a tangential example. One of my good friends, Joey Burton, is in the basketball space. And Joey is legitimately an elite shooting coach. Like, the guys that he has worked with over periods of time have consistently gotten better on their shot. Their three-point percentage has gone up. He's got arguably one of the best three-point shooters in the game in the NBA right now. And he's helped him stay there for like 5 years. It's phenomenal. Now, there's a lot of people out there that have a bigger social media following than Joey, right? And they can tout all these other players. But if you go in and you actually do the research, the people that they've worked with are just big names. And in a lot of cases, when they've worked with them, their actual performance has gone down. So it's wild, right? You think, oh, that person's great. But then you go and you look at the actual stats. And when that person worked with that athlete, their performance deteriorated. So it sucks. And it's labor intensive, but if you really want to know if somebody knows what they're doing, go in and you got to do some extra research. Because nowadays I could literally say anything I want on the internet. Maybe one person out of a million is going to go in and do that deep research. But if I'm just talking out my backside the whole time, you've got to do your own research. You have to dive in and figure out, hey, is this person doing what they say? Are they doing it at a high level? Are they getting demonstrable and repeated results with numerous people? It's time consuming and it's effortful, but I think that's what you have to do.
Definitely. It's a little bit like, maybe a similar example to what we said about, creating that system, those strength standards. It takes time, but one of my favorite, especially, the strength side of things is obviously something that I love. And one of the phrases that I always like to use is, Rome wasn't built in a day. It's not, nothing happens overnight. You've got to work at it. You don't gain experience and knowledge just by reading one book. You got to, keep learning and trying to develop that. And is there one thing you mentioned there of, actually do the exercises yourself? Is there, has there ever been times where you've, vetted exercises, done them yourself, and then realized, oh yeah, actually this is still not very good, or maybe it wasn't just right for the population that you're working with? Because sometimes that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like to think I practice what I preach, right? So I'm never going to be the leanest or the most athletic person, especially at 44. And I work with NBA level athletes. So some of these guys are 5-6% body fat and they jump 40 inches. Like, I'm never going to perform like that. But I like to think I can hold my own with regards to demonstrating activities, being able to do them in an appropriate fashion. So that's important to me. And yeah, if I'm going to try something, albeit at my low level, right, I'm still going to try it. I'm going to make sure it makes sense. I'm going to see how I feel the next day or the next couple days, see if there's any residual effects that I'm unaware of. But I think you have to vet stuff like that, especially where I'm at. If I were ever to injure somebody in my gym, like, that is a huge no-no, right? If somebody gets injured on a field, court, pitch, it sucks. Nobody ever wants to see that happen, but unfortunately it is part of the game and we're trying to reduce or minimize that likelihood. But man, getting somebody injured in a weight room is a big no-no for me, especially with my athletes. So yeah, I'm always going to vet stuff. There's been plenty of things that I thought look great on paper, and then I try it and either it doesn't feel right, or sometimes it's just a massive hassle. It takes 20 steps to set up. It's like, hey man, there's probably better activities out there that'll give me the same return on investment with a lot less grief and a lot less stress.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really glad that you touched on that about injuring, because I think sometimes coaches can get hung up if things do happen on the field or the court or anything like that. Whereas it's there's loads of different pieces to the puzzle working with an athlete. They've got their skills coach, they've got their head coach or whatever it may be. But in the gym, that's kind of the physical preparation coach, the trainers. That's their turf. And I've always tried to, in my own training, my own practice, make sure that you don't injure them, because you can control that environment. When it comes to on the field or on the court, there's loads of different variables that can happen. And it's interesting that you said there in terms of the exercises. If it takes a long time to set up, it might be the best exercise once it gets set up. But equally, if people are playing at a higher level, you're not going to get a lot of time with that person. And then if you have more time with an athlete who's just doing it in the spare time but still has a full-time job, is it really worth it? Could you do something from else there? So I thought there were two really, really good points there. We've touched a lot on sort of the programming and the coaching side of things. One thing that I wanted to touch on, especially as I think it's getting into sport a lot more, is the technology that we're using now. And I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on how much is technology influencing in the gym, and how much of it is actually beneficial.
Man, this is such a loaded question. I think you and I could talk about this for a couple of days. Well, okay, look, just in the last 5 to 10 years, think about how much more technology we have access to. Like anything else, I feel like technology is only as useful as we make it, right? And I've seen plenty of big clubs, big teams that collect data and do absolutely nothing with it. So I don't know if that's valuable at all. It's pretty cool that they have access to that and they have the money to buy that stuff. But if you're not using it, why bother? But for me, the reason I do it is I'm always trying to take subjective feelings out of the process, right? And don't get me wrong, there's a time for soft skills, for having like really hard, deep conversations with your athletes. But there's also times where it's like, hey man, I just want a really clear answer as to what do I need to program for this person to make them jump higher?
Yeah.
Right. When it comes down to like some of the tech that we're using, I use an Oura ring to track my sleep. I use Morpheus to help better understand my conditioning and my HRV. We've used velocity-based training for years. We use a GymAware. And the great thing about that is it objectifies the training process. So in a practical sense, one of my athletes, Jeelan, has played professional football and professional rugby. And so he's a weight room guy, like loves getting in the gym, loves getting after it. Strength is probably not his limiting factor. So I like to give him velocity zones, right? Because if I left him to his druthers, he would just try and put more weight on the bar every single week. And while that's fun if he's powerlifting, not always going to be as relevant to his sport. Yeah. So the great thing about using VBT is, hey, if I say your range today is 0.45 to 0.5, I don't care if that's 315 or 405. Wherever you end up that day is where you're at for that day. So it allows us to auto-regulate the process. He's not going to try and push heavy weights on days when he's not up to it physiologically. So I love VBT, and something I'm obviously getting more into now is the force plate. The force plate side of things. This is actually, believe it or not, what my master's was in 20 some years ago, but force plates back then cost like $50K. Yeah. And now we just bought a pair of Hawken Dynamics for like $6,000. So big difference, right? When you can get force plates and great technology at like 10% of what it used to cost. But this is so exciting for me because I love coaching. I love programming, but it just allows me to objectify the entire process. Like, okay, hey, is this a more like strength dominant or a more elastic dominant athlete? And I could probably tell that using other tests, but now I can tell very clearly where are they at, what kind of training prescription do I need to give them? And it just allows me to be even more laser focused with my program design going forward. So I think there's absolutely a place for it. I love it. I'm super excited about what the next 10, 15, 20 years is going to unfold for us. But it all comes down to how you're actually taking and using that information that really matters.
Absolutely. I think it's, I always remember when I was at university, I did an internship for a rugby team, and got all the data, and we were all really, really proud of it. And I always remember the head coach at the time just said, "Are they fitter? Are they stronger?" And it was like, yeah, there was all these numbers, but ultimately they went up, and it's kind of that thing of, out of everything, there was lots of other results, but ultimately, they got stronger, they got fitter, they got faster. That was it. They were ready for the season. That's exactly what we want to be aiming for. Kind of going full circle, if you like, because at the start, we spoke about how programming can be influenced by your own training in terms of if you were a weightlifter or a powerlifter. Because now, and I think for myself, as I was just finishing uni, technology was a big part of it. Even probably more so now for coaches, maybe finishing university or anything. Do you think that's going to play a bigger role in influencing programming and maybe coaching style, as opposed to maybe learning the softer skills like what you mentioned beforehand? Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way around it, right? As we have more access to technology, as we rely more on technology, I don't see any way that it can't that it can't take a bigger role. But like you alluded to, just from a societal perspective, I hope we don't get too far away from the soft skills. And, we could talk on society as a whole right now. It makes me nervous when I go to the bus stop and, my daughter and I are having a conversation and half the other kids are just doing this the whole time, right? And I try and have a conversation, they won't even look at me. Yeah. So I think this is where just like we talked earlier, we talked about general and specific exercises, right? We need to find this blend of the hard objective skills and the softer, more subjective skills. So that's great that this force plate data is going to tell me exactly what kind of program I need to write. I've still got to put it into practice. And more importantly, I've still got to be able to sell that to another human being, right? I'm not selling it to a computer, right? This is a irrational, emotional creature. So I have to be able to explain to them, hey, look, this is why we're doing this kind of stuff. I need to be able to explain to them, hey, look, you love heavy strength training and it shows. Here's why we need to do more fast, explosive activities. So, all of those elements, we can't just forget about it, right? We can't just cast it to the wayside, but we have to find this balance of, hey, look, I want hard, objective data that I can lean on, but I also need those soft skills to be able to sell and persuade and be able to, help cajole my clients and athletes to do what I need them to do. And I think if you can find that blend, and everybody's got a different ratio, right? Your hyper analytical people are going to love the hard data driven stuff. You're just feel good people, always smiling. They're going to lean on this side, and that's fine. You have to figure out your own ratio. But I think the best coaches find some way to blend and marry those two things. And that's what really makes them elite.
Yeah, definitely. The best thing that you said there was, you still got to speak to that human at the end of it. I think in terms of coaching, it's the business of people. You still need to build a relationship. I am a big believer in, you could have the best program in the world, but if you don't know how to get the best out of the athlete, make them come in and feel like, yeah, I want to get after it today. If they, because everyone's still got things that might be going on at home or anything like that. You need to get the best out of them on the day. And, that's something that, especially when I was starting out, was kind of impressed on me in terms of building relationship. And then everything else in terms of the technology, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of biomechanics, those sorts of things can all be learned, and they are all just tools, which I thought was a really good point that you made there. Lots of topics, a few tangents thrown in there, Mike. Really appreciate you taking the time to jump on. The last question that I always like to ask, from everything that we've spoken about today, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
Ooh, man, that's a tough one. But I think I've got something that actually fits in quite well to our final topic here, right? So people have always asked me over the years, like, what are your non-negotiables when it comes to hiring an intern, hiring a new employee? And there are three things. I'm going to save the best one for last, but one is work ethic. Right? You got to have a strong work ethic. You got to be willing to put in the effort. Number two is curiosity. So you got to always ask questions. You got to always ask why. Don't take the things that I tell you at face value, right? Try and dig deeper and find out the whys behind these things. But then the final piece was you got to be a great human, right? Because everything else is irrelevant if you're not a great human. And so if you're going to be in this business, like, this is why people are always like, oh, are you worried about AI and artificial intelligence and technology taking over your job? Like, not in my lifetime, dude. Right? I plan on being here for a little while. I don't worry about that because a computer can't do what I do. Maybe it can analyze movements and say, oh, your tibia should be 2 more degrees forward. But a tibia can't talk to you about, why you're stressed out, why you're not sleeping, why you're not seeing success. That's what I'm here for. So just respecting the fact that, hey, man, love numbers, love data, love creating movement models. All this stuff is great. But if you start with that core foundation of just being a great human, loving other humans, trying to take great care of the people that you work with, then there's really no reason you can't be successful in this industry.
Yeah, I think that was a really good, some great words of wisdom to finish off on there. It's that thing of, I always go back to, since COVID, everyone's an online coach, whereas you've still got to be able to speak to people and get buy-in from the people that you're working. So yeah, I really like that to finish off. If anyone's got any questions about what we've chatted about today, Mike, or want to reach out and see the content and information that you put out there, where could people find you or reach out to you?
Yep. So I always give people 2 options. If you just want free stuff, you've never heard of me, you know nothing about me, go to robertsontrainingsystems.com. We're talking legitimately thousands of pieces of free content between blogs, articles, podcasts, videos. There's so much free content there. You could dive in today and continue to go for probably a couple years and not see everything. So robertsontrainingsystems.com is a great place to start. If you're a trainer or coach, struggling maybe a little bit on the gym floor, not getting the results you want, check out completecoachcertification.com. That is essentially my training and coaching system. Everything from assessment to program design to coaching and cueing, exercise selection, progressions, regressions. It covers it all, and tends to bundle it up pretty darn well. So it'll just streamline and make everything that you do on the gym floor more efficient. So either of those two places would be a great place to start.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Mike, for sharing that. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on again. Really enjoyed the first episode. It was awesome to have you on again. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.